Friends, we are so excited to have Dr. Saiedi join us yet again as we conclude our Dawnbreakers series for the 9th time. So thank you all who are continued students, because the more we read the Dawnbreakers, the better engaged and familiar we become with our history. And please, Dr. Saiedi, thank you for being here with us.
I was invited to this group, but no particular topic was given to me. So I assume that it's more or less open, anything related to Dawnbreakers. I thought that we can do two different things. One is that, of course, if there are particular questions, those questions can be shared, and if I have something to say about those questions, I can share those ideas. In addition, since just a few days ago was the Declaration of the Báb, I thought that I may say a few things about that event, which is perhaps the most important event in the entire Dawnbreakers story. So if that is okay, maybe I can start saying a few things about the Declaration of the Báb, and then we can open it for questions and comments. It doesn't have to be questions. People can make comments and so on. Of course, in English, we say Declaration of the Báb, and this concept does not seem to be problematic, but in its original Persian or Arabic, the word that is used to denote this event is a specific term, which is different from the normal term that is used by Islamic discourse relating to similar event. Namely, in the Islamic discourse, when they want to refer to the beginning of Islam, the word that they use is Be'esat. And that means, it's difficult to translate, but means raising up. And the the idea is that this is the event in which Prophet Muhammad becomes a prophet, is raised to the station of prophethood by God. And so he becomes a messenger of God. And that happens normally by receiving the first revelation, the first divine verses from God through Angel Gabriel. So in Islamic discourse, an event like this is called Be'esat. And in the Baha'i faith, when we say Declaration of the Báb, the word is a completely different word, which means really declaration. So we are talking about a different event. And this difference is crucial, is fundamental. So let me explain just the relevance of these words and their meanings. The normal conception, the traditional conception of religion is that religion is defined in terms of will of God, wisdom of God, knowledge of God, will of God is now revealing itself to humanity. And for that reason, it is something absolute, because God's wisdom, God's will is absolute, it's unchangeable. And it is for this reason that believers of almost all traditional religions believe that their own religion is the last religion. That even if they believe that there is a Messiah or a promised one is going to come, the function of that Messiah, of that promised one, is to confirm and promote the laws and the teachings of their own religion, not to create a new religion. And there's no exception to this. I mean, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, their believers all believe in the same way. Although among Muslims, this has become a sort of obsession, and the idea that Muhammad is the last prophet of God, or the seal of prophets, has been elevated to such a central position that really the worldview of any Muslim is to a large extent religiously shaped
Yes,
and
he's not
centered by
that's-
that particular idea. Why this is the case? It's because of the conception of religion. Religion, if it is the will of God, the wisdom of God, which is now imparted, which is shared to humanity, then of course it's not something dynamic, it's not something changeable, it is something absolute. And yet all these religions are followed by another religion. The laws have been transformed, abrogated into another one. So for example, a Muslim believes that his religion, her religion is the last religion, but accepts that Jesus was prophet of God, Moses was prophet of God, and so many others. And yet they had, all these prophets had their own laws and their own ordinances and so on. And therefore, a Muslim, by definition, engages in a contradiction, namely the laws of Moses were the laws of God, and therefore they should have been absolute, and therefore there should be no religion of the Judaism or of the Christianity. And if it is a new prophet, this prophet should only enforce the laws of the previous religion. Which is, of course, according to the belief of a Muslim or a Christian, this is not the case. And yet, when it is the turn to the Islam, then suddenly Islam, because it is the will of God and wisdom of God, becomes absolute and nothing can change. Now we come to the Báb, and the Declaration of the Báb is a powerful symbol of the fact that the definition of religion, concept of religion, is not what traditionally was assumed to be. The beginning of the Baha'i dispensation, the beginning of the Baha'i religion, which was the night of declaration, is not a night, is not the time in which the Báb becomes conscious of his prophetic characteristic, is not the time that he receives for the first time divine revelation, is not the time that he becomes a prophet. The Báb, in varieties of his writings, explicitly mentions that long time before the night of declaration, he was a prophet of God, that he received divine verses, that he's even in the first major book of the Báb, a commentary on the Quranic Surah of Joseph. In one of the chapters, he talks of having this divine wisdom when he was a child. In terms of revelation of divine verses, in one of his writings, he gives a specific date which is a few months before the night of declaration. So the night of declaration is not the time that the Báb becomes prophet of God or the Báb becomes conscious of his station. It is something else. So what defines the beginning of the Bábi religion? The beginning of the Bábi religion is defined through declaration that the Báb, who was manifestation of God, who knew that he is manifestation of God, is declaring his mission to another human beings. So the night of declaration is defined in terms of conversation, interaction between prophet of God, which is representing God, and humanity, which is represented in this case by one particular human person, Mullah Hussein. And that means that religion is a product of the interaction between the divine will, divine wisdom, and the needs and development and capacities of humanity. It is the interaction of the two which creates religion. The traditional conception of religion, which reduces religion just to the divine will, divine wisdom, assumes that religion is for God. But God does not need religion. Religion is for humanity, for development of humanity, for spiritualization of humanity. But humanity is not something static. Human development and realization of human spiritual potentialities is something historical, is something dynamic. It changes throughout the ages. Therefore, the needs of the humanity is dynamic and changeable and historical. Since the purpose of religion is to help develop and guide the spiritual potentialities of humanity, that means that religion must be product of the interaction between the divine wisdom, divine will. But this divine wisdom or divine will should manifest itself in a way that corresponds to the specific stage of development of humanity, of the needs of that particular time, of the stage of spiritual development of humanity, of the concrete potentialities of humanity at that particular stage. That is why the forms of religions change. All religions are based upon an absolute divine will and wisdom, but religion is not absolute. Religion becomes something historical, something dynamic, because the divine wisdom has to be manifested in the mirror of the needs of humanity. And that makes it something which is relative and dynamic and changing. Now, the truth of all these religions, of course, are one and the same. And that's the absolute divine wisdom. But the specific form, specific laws, specific expressions of divine wisdom and divine will becomes different at different stages in accordance with the development of humanity. So the Bábi religion does not begin when the Báb becomes a prophet of God. He was a prophet of God long time ago. Maybe, as he says, and as later Abdul Baha says, from the moment of the birth. But it is when humanity becomes ready for a new spiritual culture, when humanity has acquired the new capacity for a new stage of development, it is at that moment that a new religion begins. And this is symbolized by the conversation between the Báb, representing the divine will and wisdom, and Mullah Hussein, in this case, representing and symbolizing humanity. It is for that reason that the Báb in Persian Bayan gives the very exact, specific time of his declaration. The Babi religion begins 2 hours and 11 minutes after the sunset of the lunar Islamic month of the Jumadi al-Awwal, the first Jumadi first, which is 23rd of May of 1844 of the year 1260 of Islamic calendar. So the very fact that the Declaration of the Báb takes the form of this conversation between the Báb and a particular human being, and this conversation becomes the beginning, the birth of a new religion, is of immense importance. That means that the whole conception of religion is becoming redefined. Of course, always religion was like that, but the followers of different religions misunderstood their religion. And that means, of course, that religion becomes something which is historical. And this becomes what in the Baha'i language, usually we call it progressive revelation, the doctrine of progressive revelation. Namely, the revelation of God manifests itself in new ways, and because the capacities, the spiritual potentialities of humanity increases, therefore it becomes a progressive revelation. And that means that there is no final religion, there is no final revelation, and that the truth of religion is relevant to a specific stage of development of humanity. In the same place that the Báb gives the specific date of his declaration in Persian Bayan, and that part is translated in the selections from the writings of the Báb. In that same place, he says that that moment was the beginning of the day of resurrection. The moment of the declaration of the Báb not only is the beginning, is the birth of the new religion, Babi religion, and in a sense, Baha'i religion, because they are twin revelations, and although independent, but they are inseparable from each other. But at the same time, this is also the day of resurrection. The moment of declaration is the moment that resurrection begins. And this is another fundamental important concept, the concept of day of judgment, day of resurrection, is central to traditional religions. And again, in Islam, it becomes much more emphasized, much more explicitly discussed, and therefore concepts like heaven and hell and things like that becomes, to some extent, again, obsessions for ordinary religious discourse. So if you look at the statements in the Quran about the day of resurrection, of heaven and hell, from a Baha'i point of view, from the point of view of the Báb, who calls the moment of his declaration the realization of the day of resurrection, it is clear that for the Báb, the statements in the Quran, the statements in traditional religions about heaven, hell, resurrection, and so on, these are symbolic. They are metaphorical statements. They are not literal statements. Unfortunately, the world of traditional religions, including the world of Islam, take statements about heaven, hell, resurrection, and so on literal. vast majority of them, they take the words of the Quran about these things literal. But if you take the words of the Quran literal about these issues, you are engaged in facing fundamental spiritual contradictions and problems. For example, Quran always begins by emphasizing that God is compassionate and merciful. Every chapter of the Quran begins in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. And yet the concept, look at the concept of hell. The concept of hell is the idea that if a person has lived 40, 50 years in this, on this earth and has made some mistakes and has engaged in some acts which violated the religious laws, this person is going to go to hell. Now, what is hell? Hell is an eternal place. It's not for 40 years. It's not for 50 years. It's not for 200 years. It's eternal. And what it is chamber of torture. The entire concept of a hell, as it is discussed in the Quran, if you take the Quranic statement literal, God becomes a sadistic being who loves and is pleased to inflict pain on people. The whole concept of hell, as is discussed in Quran extensively, is that people in the hell constantly very dirty liquids, hot, are poured on them so that their flesh, their bones, and so on are all melted down. And then, by the will of God, they are recreated instantly again so that they go through the same torture again and again. And this is for eternity. And one can ask, what kind of God is that? It's torture for the sake of torture, because there would be no other opportunity that these people learn. For instance, punishment is not for learning so that they would live a better life later. It's eternal. And it is torture for the sake of torture. And it is not justice, because if a person has made some mistakes for 30 years, for 40 years, for 50 years, the punishment has no proportion to that. It's eternal torture. The concept of heaven is no better. The concept of heaven, as it is defined in the literal statements of the Quran, becomes a place in which the whole purpose of being becomes physical pleasure. Hell is a place that, paradise, heaven, is a place in which you don't have to work. All foods infinitely are available to you, the most delicious ones. You are given infinite possibilities for sexual pleasure. Again, there is no toil, no labor, nothing. It's pure consumption, consumption after consumption after consumption after consumption. And this is supposed to be the reward of being a spiritual. The literal expressions of this paradise is the complete reduction of humans to the level of body, to the level of biology, to the level of physics. Anything that gives pleasure defines meaning of life for any animal. That's in the perfection, heaven or paradise. Which is, of course, a total contradiction, because the whole purpose of religion is to elevate human beings from the realm of nature, from the realm of biology, and to awaken the spiritual consciousness, the spiritual reality, the truth of humanity. But the way that heaven is discussed is purely physical and purely physical pleasures. A strange event, of course, going to hell or heaven is after the moment of resurrection. Resurrection is the end of history. All the dead are become alive and they come before God. And in front of God, when they are meeting God, attaining the presence of God, they are judged, so they go either to hell or to heaven. One point that the Báb, in all his writings, is so clear that he's emphasizing this point so much, is that for the Báb, the heaven, even if you go to heaven or paradise, whatever that heaven or paradise, that is nothing as compared to the ultimate pleasure of attaining the presence of God. Namely, in the story of resurrection, what should be emphasized by consciousness of Muslims is that that is the moment that you attain the presence of God. That is the ultimate delight. That is the true heaven. That is the true paradise. That is the entire meaning, mystical meaning of our existence. And yet the way that it is understood ordinarily by people who claim to believe in Quran and Islam, this is nothing. This is just a means so that they go to the real good, which is heaven, which means consumption of the consumption of the consumption of various bodily pleasures for eternity. That dull, useless life, totally unspiritual, physical degradation is defined as the ultimate heaven, the same as hell. I just mentioned these things briefly in order to say that these are, of course, in contradiction with everything that Quran emphasizes, everything that all religion emphasize. As a sociologist, I'm a sociologist, I should say that there is no surprise that when radical clerics of Islam who take Quran literally, when they take they acquire power and take over a state, the prevalence of torture and violence, physical violence and torture in society, that is no surprise, because this is what in their mind is the justice. God is the absolute just. God is the absolute just judge. And torture is the defining feature of the justice of God. Now we come to the revelation of the Báb. And the Báb has come in order to unveil the spiritual truth, which was forgotten of previous religions. And one of them, one very important one, of course, becomes related to the concept of the day of resurrection, to the concept of heaven and hell. So the question is how the moment of declaration becomes also the moment of resurrection. As I mentioned, the concept of the day of declaration refers really to the idea that humanity has become ready for a new, higher stage of spiritual development. And that readiness, acquiring the new capacity for humans, become the occasion for this interaction, this conversation, that the will of God now manifests itself in a new form that becomes the occasion for realization of new potentialities, creation of a new spiritual civilization in the world. Now, that is the secret of this concept of resurrection. For the Báb, resurrection is not the end of history. Resurrection is the end of one stage of history, which is at the same time the beginning of a new stage of development. One very important issue also is that for the Báb, heaven and hell, they are not just for human beings. Everything has its heaven and everything has its hell. It's not just for humans. What is heaven? According to the Báb, everything yearns for, longs for achieving perfection at its own level. Realization of potentialities of anything is the heaven of that thing. Attaining the perfection for anything at every stage becomes the paradise, becomes the heaven of that thing. What is hell? Hell means the state of being deprived of realizing perfection, of realizing potentialities. That means that not only humans, everything, including the entire realm of nature, has heaven and hell. Now, the Báb says that human beings have moral responsibility for everything, so that to the extent of the power of humans, they should help everything to attain their paradise, to attain their heaven. And the Báb says that if a human being, in relation to anything, any object, has the power to help it realize its perfection, realize its paradise, and fails to do that, this person would be responsible before God. In other words, you can see that a powerful confirmation of sanctity and sacredness of all beings and the human responsibility towards nature, towards environment, and so on is just rooted within the theology of the Báb. Now, human beings are also one of the beings. So what is heaven and hell for human beings who have this particular developed stage of consciousness and so on? It's the same thing for human beings. Heaven, paradise, is realization of their concrete spiritual potentialities, and hell is being deprived of that. Now, I'm going to mention one statement of the Báb in Persian Bayan. It's one of my favorite statements of the Báb. Unfortunately, it's not translated, but it's easy to translate. I'll say, this is in Persian Bayan, and I say the original Persian first, and then I translate. It's a very small statement. It says, Jannat dar har zaman, kamal an zaman ast. Heaven in each age is the perfection of that age. Heaven or paradise. Heaven in each age is the perfection of that age. So in every age, heaven is the perfection of that age. Suddenly, heaven and hell become something historical, because humanity develops and its potentialities changes, expands, and therefore concrete potentialities become dynamic. That means that what is heaven now, in the future becomes the hell. hell of the present becomes, heaven of the present becomes hell of the future. Heaven of the present means realization of perfection of potentialities which are concretely possible at this stage of development of humanity. So once this happens, we are in paradise. But now that means that humanity becomes capable of new potentialities, realization of new potentialities. That means that from now on, heaven is realization of the new potentialities. If we remain stagnant in the previous heaven, means that we are refraining from attaining perfection, development of our potentialities, and that is by definition hell. So at the time of Jesus, heaven was realization of this new spiritual perfections. But at the time of Muhammad, if a person stays in that heaven, it means that this person is refusing to realize the new spiritual potentialities which has become possible for humanity, and which means that this person is in hell. A Muslim believing in Quran and Prophet Muhammad is in heaven, but when due to the spiritual development of humanity, the Báb appears, which means that it is the time for realization of new spiritual potentialities. Those who realize these new potentialities are in heaven. Those who fail to realize these new potentialities and they cling to the previous heaven, by definition, they enter hell. So the day of declaration was a day that a new religion of God begins through conversation between the Báb and a human being representing, symbolizing humanity, who has become ready for a new stage of development, who has become ready for realization of concrete potentialities of this age. In other words, resurrection for humanity, which is the attainment of perfection, that is identical with this moment of declaration. And the Báb explains that as long as the new manifestation of God exists on this earth, is the duration of the day of resurrection. So, for example, Jesus was, as a manifestation of God, as the Son of God, was guiding humanity for about 4 years. Those 4 years till he's crucified. That is the duration of resurrection. Muhammad was for 23 years, from beginning of Islam till the time that Prophet Muhammad passes away. It's 23 years during which Quran is revealed. That 23 years is the duration of the day of resurrection. For the Báb, of course, the duration of the day of resurrection becomes about 6 years, from the moment of declaration till July 9, 10, 1850, which is martyrdom of the Báb. As you can see, the whole concept, not only of religion, but all varieties of religious discourse, and the whole conception of human being and society, all are undergoing a fundamental transformation. And everything is now understood in terms of a historical consciousness in which humanity becomes interacting with God. Humanity starts to appear as the image of God. And so a covenant, a contract, covenant is contract. A covenant between God and humanity is made And this covenant is remade and remade and remade. Each religion is a new covenant. Covenant, you know, it cannot be between one will, one consciousness, and another dead thing. Covenant, contract, is between two consciousness, between two wills. The whole idea of covenant, which exists in varieties of forms of religious traditions, is affirming actually the dignity of human beings as the image of God. Because as consciousness and as will, we are participating in a covenant with God. And the whole concept of religion is defined in these new ways. Let me say a few little things, and then we can have more interactions, discussions, and so on. One of the very important events of this night of declaration, of course, is that the Báb reveals in the language of divine verses at least the first chapter of his book, Commentary on the Surah of Joseph. This commentary on the Surah of Joseph has different other names. The famous one that the Báb likes that name is Qayyum al-Asma. Qayyum al-Asma. I don't have time really to explain what is this Qayyum al-Asma and what is relation to this commentary on the Surah of Joseph. Just one little thing that, you know, in Arabic, in Hebrew and in Arabic, each alphabetical letter has a particular numerical value. Actually, the order of these numerical values in Arabic language is the order of Hebrew alphabet. So it is like that. A is 1, B is 2, J is 3, D is 4, and then H is 5, V is 6, Z is 7, and then one particular T is 9, Y is 10, and then K becomes 20, L becomes 30, M becomes 40, and this goes till you get to Q, which is 100, and then R becomes 200, SH becomes 300, and this continues till you get to the end of the alphabet, which is Qain, like GH, and this is 1000. So from 1 to 1000, and the order of these is the order of Hebrew alphabet. The Báb uses these characteristics in Arabic language, namely, he looks at the numerical value of each term, each name, each concept. But then that value becomes equal to a number of other terms. And so he can create connections between concepts which goes beyond the ordinary form of language. Anyway, having said that, his book is interpretation of the Quranic story of Joseph, commentary on the Surah of Joseph. Each chapter of the Quran called Surah, one Surah. The Báb chooses the story of Joseph as, in a sense, manifesto of his new religion, as announcing, declaring to humanity the new revelation, for varieties of reasons. I'm sure one of the reasons is the fact that the story of Joseph unites Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Although these groups usually have been at odds with each other and have been killing each other even right now, the story of Joseph binds them all together. The story of Joseph, of course, is discussed in Torah, but is repeated in one of the chapters of the Quran, which is called chapter of Joseph. And so that's something that Jewish, Christian, and Muslims are united in it. And the Báb has come to unite humanity in spiritual consciousness. So that becomes a very appropriate concept. But in addition to these, there are other mystical reasons. The word Joseph, which in Arabic is Yusuf, Joseph, is equal, I think, to 156. And that is equal to the word Qayyum. Why it is Qayyum al-Asma? This book, commentary on the Surah of Joseph, is called Qayyum al-Asma by the Báb, because Qayyum and Joseph have the same numerical value, which I think is 156. I mean, right now I can calculate that, but it takes a few. Qayyum, for example, Q is 100, Y is 10, V is 6, and M is 40. So it becomes 156, correct. So Qayyum is 156. Joseph, Yusuf, is also 156. And so the Báb, for the Báb, Joseph in reality represents Qayyum. What is Qayyum? Qayyum is the name in the Quran for God. Also the word Qa'im, which the Shia Islam believe that the promised one, they call him Qa'im. Qa'im is the one who stands up, who is going to be raised up. And the word Qa'im, which means upright, means standing. At the same time, philosophically means existing. Qiyam, or rising up, is the same as the word for existence. In English, it's the same way, existence. That's why the philosophers of existentialism, they play so much with this word existence. Existence means standing out of, emerging out of, rising out of. And it is the same concept in the Arabic term for Qa'im, for Qiyam, for Taqawwum. Abdul Baha'i in some answered questions, talks about two different types of Qiyam, namely standing up, which means existence, really. Anyway, I don't want to create too much confusion, but Qa'im at the same time means existing. Qayyum is the exaggerated form of Qa'im. Qayyum means the one who exists but is self-subsistent, whose existence is out of it himself or itself, is the cause of its existence and becomes the cause of the existence of everything else. The Quran a number of times defines God with two attributes, Hayy and Qayyum. Huwa al-Hayyul Qayyum. He is, namely God is. Hayy means the ever-living, and Qayyum means self-subsistent, whatever that I mentioned. And from the point of view of the Báb, these are reference to the revelation of God in the form of attributes of Hayy, living, and Qayyum. Qayyum becomes represented by the Báb himself, and Hayy, living, which Hayy is equal to 18 in Arabic. Hayy is one form of H and Y. Y is 10, and that other form of H is 8. So it is represented by 18 letters of the living, and Qayyum is represented by the Báb himself. So the Quranic statement Quranic verse, which is repeated in the Quran, I think 3 times, that he is the living, the Qayyum, becomes, in interpretations of the Báb, the reference to the revelation of God through the Báb as Qayyum, and to his first believers as letters of the living. Now, this Qayyum numerically is equal to Joseph. And so for the Báb, Joseph represents the truth of prophets of God. And so at one time, Joseph is Joseph. At another time, Joseph becomes Imam Hussein of Islam, for whom Báb had particular affection for Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein in Islam is famous for his martyrdom and his heroic, tragic sacrifice. And then in the interpretation of the Báb, in the commentary on the Surah of Joseph, that Joseph, who appears as Hussein, now is appearing as the Báb. The Báb is that Joseph. And because Joseph and Qayyum are one and the same, that means that the revelation of Joseph, of manifestation of God in this age at the time of the Báb, becomes the revelation in absolute divine verses, divine revelation, utter pure revelation of God, which is represented by Qayyum. Anyway, one of the most important events of this night of declaration is that Qayyum al-Asma. Asma means names. Qayyum al-Asma means the self-subsisting Lord of all names. This particular work of the Báb begins to be revealed at that night. And definitely the first chapter of it consists of 111 chapters, the work of the Báb, because the commentary, because the Surah of Joseph has 112 chapters. And so each chapter of the work of the Báb becomes interpretation of one of the verses of the Quranic Surah. But in one place, in one chapter, he interprets simultaneously 2 of the verses. And so it becomes 111 chapters. By the way, the word Ali, which is the name of the Báb, is equal to 110. And so 110 and 111 becomes for him symbolic reference to his name, Ali, which is also the name of God. Ali means the most exalted, is one of the names of God. In any case, I have to control myself. One last point that I mentioned is that on this first chapter of the Qayyum al-Asma, of the commentary on the Surah of Joseph, revealed on the night of declaration, one of the things that this chapter mentions is that God, it is in the language of divine verses, so God is speaking, like Quran. And in this first chapter, God is defining that we decided that our words, our verses would be our proof, our testimony, our evidence for humanity. And that is, of course, obvious to anybody who is familiar with any Baha'i writings, but it is of immense fundamental sociological, cultural significance. In the past, traditionally, the way followers of different religions have understood religion, the truth of religion, the presence of God, is confirmed by strange events, by strange miraculous events, namely violation of the laws of nature. Alternatively, to become a member of a religion has been through coercion, varieties of coercion. either through a holy war and so on, people are subjugated and they have to submit to that particular religion. And if not, it is through coercion, through socialization and culture and so on. Namely, you live in a culture or society in which professing a particular religious belief becomes a cause of access to occupations, prestige, work, rights, and so on for you. In Iran right now, for example, right now, if you pretend that you believe in Islam, particularly in the version that the radical clerics express it, that becomes a powerful force for socioeconomic mobility. You can get the best jobs, you can get the positions of power, you would have access to varieties of credits and so on, which ordinary others would not. And now, if you are courageous like Baha'is, who dare to know, who have the courage to believe that religion is a matter of investigation, independent investigation, is not a matter of inheritance, is not a matter of coercion, and therefore they refuse to recant, that means that you are going to be deprived of all rights, the way it is right now in Iran. Miracles, followers of different religions are obsessed with miracles, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Muslims. But the fact is that miracles, not only there are fundamental problems with them anyway, they cannot be the proof of the truth of religion. Because only a few people, even if it happens, a few people can witness that. The vast majority of humanity at that time and all future generations, none of them can experience that. And therefore, God becomes fundamentally unjust, namely provides for just a few tiny number of people his evidence for the truth of religion, but refuses to provide that evidence for vast majority of humanity, and yet expects the entire humanity to believe in that religion. What happens in the revelation of the Báb, and when you read the writings of the Báb, and Baha'u'llah is the same way, unlike the traditional conception of religion, which constantly talks about miracles, the Báb constantly emphasizes that miracle is not an adequate evidence or proof of religion of God, of the presence of God, of divine knowledge. On the contrary, he makes the word of God the ultimate evidence of the truth of God, of presence of God. The word is expression of the spirit. It's not a strange natural physical event which violates the laws of God. Laws of nature are laws of God. In the Baha'i faith, the laws of nature are laws of God, are expressions of the power of God. They are the supreme expressions of divine wisdom and divine power. It's the laws of nature, not violation of the laws of nature. But the highest expression of God is through not natural events, but through something spiritual, namely words. Divine wisdom takes a visible form in the shape of words, which are spiritual, non-material. And these words of God, which transforms the hearts of humanity, which create a new civilization, which expresses the need for the concrete potentialities, requirements of the age. That is the supreme evidence of the truth of God. And the Báb refused. People constantly said to him that if you are a prophet of God, do this miracle, do that miracle. And he said that these are not relevant. Actually, he said exactly what Prophet Muhammad said. Muslims are not familiar with Quran. They don't read Quran. If you read Quran, there is not even one instance in which people come and ask Muhammad, if you are a prophet of God, do this miracle or that miracle. Quran is filled with the statements that Meccans or Arabs come and say, if you are a prophet of God, do this. If you don't do this, do another. In one statement of the Quran, they give 6 options to Prophet Muhammad. Do one of these 6. If not these 6 options. And the answer that God gives to these questions in the Quran, universally, without exception, is that our words of Quran is sufficient. And other places he says that if we bring these miracles and still you don't believe, we have to kill you. So in a sense, it's the mercy of God not to engage in those expressions of miracles, because he wants to save these people. So Quran constantly is filled with the statements which makes it absolutely clear that Prophet Muhammad refused to accept these demands for miracles. If you read the Quran, this is so obvious. And yet, when you talk with the Muslim clerics and the ordinary Muslim culture created by these clerics, you assume that Prophet Muhammad every time was coming and creating miracles, things like that. And then they fabricated a lot of miracles. In the Muslim text, they say that, for instance, the body of Muhammad did not have a shade, did not have a shadow. Every body has a shadow, but Prophet's body did not have shadow. Of course, it's total fabrication. The Quran frequently says that I am a human being like you. The only difference is that I receive divine revelation. And the Báb, on the very night of declaration, in the very first chapter of the Qayyum al-Asma, is affirming this fundamental feature of the new revelation. What proves the truth of religion becomes the word of God. And this has fundamental sociological consequences. It's not a matter of coercing, and it's not a matter of seeing strange events. It's contemplating the word of God, deliberating, understanding the word of God. But this requires, if this is the only proof of God, if this is the only legitimate basis of joining religion of God, that means that all humanity from now on are defined as conscious beings, as spiritual beings, as image of God. Although all humanity have been image of God, this is the truth. On the first page of Torah, this is expressed, that God said, let's make humans in our own image. But from the point of view of the Baha'i faith, because humanity is historical, now is the time that humanity actually emerges as this image of God, not as an animal, not as a member of nature, not as a biological entity, but as image of God. That is why sexism and racism and nationalism and all these other things have no place in this religion, in this new future dispensation, because it is the realm in which humans appear as human. Humans appear in terms of their truth, which is their sorry, their soul, their spirit as the image of God, not as a physical being. God doesn't have a body, so God is not feminine, God is not masculine, God is not black, God is not Japanese, God is not white, God doesn't have a body to have these characteristics. So humans being the image of God, that means that the truth of human beings is their spirit, has nothing to do with where they are born, what family they are born, what is their ethnicity, what is their gender, and the like. Emergence of humanity as conscious beings, as spiritual beings, who now become part of a religion, not through coercion, not through strange events, but through understanding, meditating, deliberating the meaning of the words of God. That means simultaneously the emergence of a new culture, a culture in which all humans are recognized as spiritual beings, endowed with rights, endowed with sanctity, as reflections of God, as images of God. And this means, of course, from political democracy to equal rights to movements towards destruction of discriminations on the basis of variety of things. And finally, emerging of the unity of all human beings as image of God, because their truth is one and the same, which in the revelation of Baha'u'llah becomes realized through concept of oneness of humankind and peace and other theories and so on. But the foundation of this new world order, of this new spiritual order, is led on the night of declaration, where the word of God becomes the only evidence of the truth of the manifestation of God. My last point, in the story of Joseph, you know that in the story of Joseph, Joseph becomes sovereign because he could interpret the dreams. You remember the story of Joseph? He could interpret the dreams, including finally the dream of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And because of that capacity, he himself became a sovereign in Egypt. The Báb uses this concept because his work is interpreting this story of Joseph, and Joseph becomes himself. And he's saying that he has this sovereignty of God. The first chapter of the first chapter of Qayyum al-Asma is called chapter of sovereignty. Suratul Mulk, chapter of sovereignty. The same thing which was given by, the Quran says that we gave sovereignty to Joseph because he could interpret dreams. Now the Báb is saying that he can interpret dreams, including the dream of the young Joseph. He can interpret the words of God. He can interpret all the signs and interpretation of the entire surah of Joseph, interpretation of the Quran. That is the unique power that he has, which is the occasion and the basis of his own spiritual sovereignty. So the first chapter revealed at the time that Mullah Hussein was present is the chapter on sovereignty. And this sovereignty is related again to the words of God, which interpret words of God, which interprets varieties of signs, which points to a new direction for realization of potentialities of humanities and so on. I'm talked too much perhaps, but I wanted you to see that this declaration of the Báb, the way this night, significance of that night is understood in the writings of the Báb and so on, is multifaceted, interrelated, all these concepts, and extremely beautiful. If there are particular comments, questions, and so on.
Yeah, with so much gratitude, first of all, Dr. Saiedi, it's such an outstanding talk. What a great way, especially for the people on the West Coast, to wake up. The writings of the Báb are so metaphysical that they're literally very difficult to understand. And I don't want to pitch your book, but for the friends who have not heard or do not have a copy of Gate of the Heart, highly recommend it. 20 pages between 139 to 159. Dr. Saiedi eloquently discusses the whole Qayyum al-Asma, the Surah of Joseph. And if that isn't enough of a tease, if you want to learn about the 4 levels of mystery, you can also find that in the Gate of the Heart. And it all but takes 1 page, and that's, I will tell you, page 134 of his book. It's fantastic. Please, if you have any comments or questions, raise your hand. Perfect. Thank you, Derick. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, I have a question. All, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all are expecting or have prophecies concerning a promised one or a day of judgment and resurrection. And even if they don't want to accept another religion, as you say, wouldn't they at least accept the Báb and Baha'u'llah as fulfilling those prophecies?
Unfortunately, they should, but they don't. And the response to the Báb constantly in his writings mentions this. He mentions that he is Prophet Muhammad who has come back in a new form and so on, but he is Prophet Muhammad. He's the divine revelation of the Quran. He's the truth of the Quran. That has become the basis of the belief of these people who call themselves Muslim. And yet, these people not only do not accept him, but even they reject the word Muslim being applied to the Báb. Namely, they consider him a heretical being, and therefore a person who should be condemned to death. And so they put him into varieties of prisons, and of course, finally kill him. So this is something that constantly the Báb is mentioning, that these people are not paying attention to the truth of Islam, and that they are not thinking for themselves. And in Persian Bayan and other places, he says that Muslims should learn from the first believer in Prophet Muhammad. And that first believer did not come to believe in Islam because it was a source of occupation and social prestige and power. Because at that time, it was the exact opposite. Accepting Muhammad when nobody else accepted him meant persecution, meant losing varieties of things, required sacrifice, required courage. And so if he came to believe in Prophet Muhammad, it was because of his independent investigation that his heart was convinced and so on, not because of material advantages and so on, not because of imitation of this person or that person, following this clergy or that clergy. And he says that all Muslims should do that, the same thing. And he says that, but they are doing the exact opposite things. They are becoming dependent on clerics who are also themselves dependent on others, and all dependent on material advantages, social advantages that keeping this tradition brings with itself. So the Báb is asking people to start to become a human being, namely to think for themselves rather than becoming dependent on others. And so he says that all prophets of God, when they appear, all promised ones, when they appear, which is the highest bounty of God to these people, instead of being appreciated and supported, they are all persecuted, and many times they are killed, their followers persecuted and killed, because these people don't think for themselves, because religion for them becomes a matter of inheritance or imitating others or material advantages and so on, which blinds them. So he's calling to what in the Baha'i religion becomes the concept of independent investigation of truth, that the whole concept of religion has to be redefined.
Thank you. Do we have any other comment or questions? Yes, Rob, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Dr. Saiedi. So nice to see you. I was wondering if you could please be so kind to share with us, if you can, what your current focus of work is. If you are working on a book, if you might share what that topic might be, we would be very interested. Thank you.
It's so nice seeing my friend Rob, and this is one of the advantages of this sort of Zoom meetings, that friends of many years, they can reconnect. In terms of pardon? Yes, Beta is saying that thanks to Neda, which is true. In terms of my work, I'm dealing with a lot of works. Actually, you know, I retired almost a year ago. I was teaching at UCLA. So in June, I retired. So a few days from now, it becomes a full year. And I assume that when I retire, my work becomes much more limited. And so I can relax a little more. But after 2-3 months, the reality of the situation has become the reverse. So right now I am bombarded with varieties of projects and works and so on that I'm getting really crazy in a sense. One of my works now is, of course, teaching a course on sociology of religion for BIHE, which I find that the most meaningful form of teaching for me. I'm much more proud of teaching that course for those students than the courses that I taught at UCLA or Carleton College or other places that I have taught. But that takes a lot of time and so on. And then I have all these varieties of projects, articles, I mean, and things, and lots of Zoom meetings. So anyway, I'm very, very busy. If there is one thing that recently in the last 6 months I have been emphasizing, and so maybe in the future I consider the possibility of writing something, is about the sociological concept of secularization. The philosophical, sociological discussions is primarily pointing out that that religion belongs to previous ages, the old ages of humanity, and so it has no future. And so this is normally called secularization theory, that religion is losing its significance, and so there is a lot of opposition to religion in varieties of ways and so on, and sociologically this manifests itself in different ways and so on. Anyway, it's a very complicated topic, a very controversial topic, And I think in all these discussions, whether those who are believing in secularization thesis and those who object to that, there is a poverty of thinking because religion is not defined for them in a historical way, in a dynamic historical way. And so they end up in lots of contradictions and so on. I have found, for instance, Shoghi Effendi's work, The Promised Day is Come, where he talks about the three false gods of the modern age and so on. A very unique contribution to this secularization discussion. And I believe that Promised Day is Come is a new way of looking at secularization theory and so on. So anyway, I think a Baha'i can provide insights regarding this issue that is very difficult to be attained from any other source and so on. So it's possibility that that something comes out of this. But at the same time, I'm dealing with lots of issues and so on. But no particular book project at this moment.
خیلی متشکرم.
Okay, it seems that
Yeah, Paul, please unmute yourself. Sorry, and Paul will be the last one. And actually, Jamie will be the last. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I was wondering about you had a series of talks that were for quite some time posted on Santa Monica Baha'i Community's website. They were a whole series of lectures on sociology and philosophy. You know, they were just so great, and they're no longer there. I was wondering if those are available somewhere else.
Oh, that's well. First of all, thank you for your kind words about them. And I didn't know that they are no longer available there. I have a website through my friends. I have it. I'm not good in computer stuff, so maybe they would be available there. That website has Persian section and English section. The English section is bigger. And it has audio, visual, and also articles written, and then videos of talks or things like that. The address of that is researchbaha'i.com. Not Baha'i research, research Baha'i. And Baha'i doesn't have apostrophe. Baha'i is B-A-H-A-I. So researchbaha'i.com is a place that some of my works can be found there. Not all of them. My books like Logos and Civilization or Gate of the Heart are not there. Although they are available in some ways on internet if one looks hard. But a number of articles and a lot of talks are there. In Santa Monica, because we are no longer in California, we are in Indiana, in this city called Bloomington, which is a university town, and we love it very much. So it's almost a year that we have moved to here. So we are not anymore in Santa Monica. But one of the talks in Santa Monica, a long series, they were all on the same day, were about Persian Bayan. I don't know if they are available still there or not, but those can be very useful if one wants to know the Persian Bayan, the contents of the Persian Bayan as well. I hope it is still there, but if not, probably on my website is available, hopefully. But anyway, thank you for your warm words about them.
Okay, yes, thank you, Paul. Jamie, our last one. Thank you, Jamie.
Mine is mostly a thank you that you opened up so much knowledge to me, answered many questions regarding why people of religion can be so brutal, and how you connected it with their concept of hell and God being just, and that being just meant a cruelty in hell. So actually, okay, so people do these things, they think they are acting like what God would do. Okay, so that's really enlightening. That's not simple.
Yes. I mean, it's an unhappy thought, but it is a reality, unfortunately.
Yes, and the whole idea about perfection, attaining perfection is attaining the perfection of your time, of your age, and how, okay, so now it makes sense that perfection changes.
Yes.
And it just clears up a lot for me historically about the past and those who lived in the past, and how maybe crude to us it may seem that people lived in the past, but you know, they had a perfection to attain.
Yes.
But it's not static. So I just think that these ideas will really help me in my conversations with those I'm trying to teach the faith to, or and with other Baha'is. Thank you so much. I need to read your book.
Thank you so much. But we are all blessed because of the writings of the Báb, writings of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, Shukri Effendi, because all these new ways of thinking and so on are in their writings, and they are wonderful, but they have to be studied, and many of these writings are not available yet. That makes the Baha'i faith so exciting. At the same time, it means that there is so much of the faith which is yet to be discovered. The worst thing that, in my judgment, a Baha'i can have is to assume that he or she knows the Baha'i faith. The fact is that vast majority of the divine revelation in the form of the writings of the Báb, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, are not yet available. Even the originals are not available, let alone translated. And so the conceptions that we have of the Baha'i faith should be always accompanied with humility, that we have a tentative understanding of the Baha'i faith. But we know how much more oceans of spiritual wisdom are still there that has to be discovered, has to be realized gradually. And I hope that the young Baha'is recognize this fact, and they feel the responsibility that it is them, not a strange metaphysical event, who has to discover and share these gems, which are totally untouched in their time.
Okay. Thank you again, friends. Thank you so much, Dr. Saiedi, and we will see you next time.
Yes, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Neda, for the invitation.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Derick. That was really, really, truly lovely.